Start in just a minute.
What Jimmy failed to tell you is that I was his 5th grade teacher, so this is kind of his gift to me for Father's Day. Okay, it's nice to see such a big crowd here for our first panel. Bob Briggs has worn a lot of hats during his long career, and not just the 10-gallon type that we're so used to seeing him in. He's a writer, he's a critic, stand-up comedian, actor, film historian, but I think we love him most because he's the curator of low-budget movies and the drive-in lifestyle that we remember so fondly. He calls himself a professional redneck, but if I could change that, I'd call him a Renaissance redneck. So let's welcome the one and only Joe Bob Briggs.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, Joe Bob.
I was standing in the hall, so I didn't hear a word that you said. But
Oh, shoot, read. Here you go, you can read it.
oh, okay. I'll check it out before you interview me.
See if I pass muster
All right.
there. First of all, I want to welcome you to Sinister Creature Con in Sacramento.
Happy to be here.
This is about as far west as you can get, cowboy, so I hope you feel at home.
Oh no, I've been to Hawaii.
Oh, okay. Now, you were born in Dallas, Texas. So
Yep.
you're a Texas boy. But you were raised in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Well, you know, Calvin Trillin says you're from wherever you went to high school. So
Where did
I
you
went
go
to high school in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you identify with Little Rock, Arkansas. You got your start actually in print as a newspaper columnist. You went back to Dallas, worked for the Dallas Times-Herald. And did you start off right away with doing film reviews for the newspaper, or did you kind of work slowly into that?
No, I was a sports writer. I started in Little Rock back in the days when they hired apprentice copy boys. When I was 13 years old, I went to work for the Dallas Times-Herald. I'm sorry, not the Dallas Times-Herald, the Arkansas Democrat.
Oh, okay.
When I was 13 years old, and so. But they call it copy boy, but you have to write like 10 articles a day. So it was a writing course for me because they just make you write all the time. So as a result of that, they have a sports writing scholarship at Vanderbilt University. And so I won the scholarship.
Wow.
Now the guy who won it the year before me is much smarter than me, because he stayed in sports.
Wow.
And it's a guy named Skip Bayless, who is who is one of the highest paid sports commentators in the country.
Right. Yeah.
So he stayed with sports. I couldn't go through the seasons more than like 2 or 3 times, and then it was just like, to me, it was all the same game over and over and over again. So I couldn't write about sports the rest of my life. So so I went into other things and ended up in Dallas at the Dallas Times-Herald.
And was it your idea to do the reviews of low-budget films? Because I've heard you say before that those are the kinds of films that never got reviewed.
Yeah, I was noticing that the films that opened at the drive-in never got noticed.
Yeah.
And never got reviewed.
Right.
And so I would call up the distributors, and they would say, we don't let critics see our films. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, then I'm going to go to the drive-in and watch them, you know?
Right.
And so so I started reviewing the films, and the first guy who started screening them for me in advance so that I could, so the review could come out on Friday, because the films only ran 1 week.
Yeah.
So I would have to go on Friday. The review wouldn't come out till Monday. It wasn't the best way to do it. And so was Roger Corman. Roger Corman saw the column. He liked the column. We started talking. I went to his studio. I call it a studio. It was a
Warehouse?
it was a lumber yard, actually.
Oh,
He'd bought this lumber yard on Venice Boulevard.
Yeah.
That's where he shot the interiors of his movies.
Now, he was known as the King of the Bees, right?
Well, he didn't like to be called the King of the Bees, because a guy wrote a book called The King of the Bees, and he put Roger in the book, and I said, "How do you like being called the King of the Bees, Roger?" And he said, "I don't like that at all." Because it implies that there's an A movie and a B movie, and I make the B movie, and the B movie is worse than the A movie.
Right.
And I said, "Well, how do you like being called King of the Exploitation Film?" And he said, "I love that." And so he was one of the major influences on me, because the conversations that I had with Roger resulted in the drive-in totals. Because I would ask Roger, what do you need for this kind of movie? What do you need for this kind of movie? And he loves to get technical about it.
Yeah.
You know? He loves to say, "Well, Joe Bob, you need in a movie featuring breast nudity, you need at least 3 females, one of which is the star of the film, who will appear nude from the waist up twice in 2 scenes, one near the beginning of the film, one near the end of the film. The other 2 supporting actresses will appear in 1 scene each, both using breast nudity, and those 4 scenes will cause the viewer to think that he has seen a lot more than he has actually seen." And he was a master of stuff like that. He would say, "If you're going to use a motor vehicle chase, you need the 2 best motor vehicle chases at the beginning of the film, within the first 10 minutes, and at the end of the film. Now, if you add a 3rd motor vehicle chase, which I would not advise, because it's an unneeded expense." He would go on like this forever. And then he would say, "The ideal length of a movie, Joe Bob, is 78 minutes. And I would say, "Why is that, Roger?" And he would say, "Because if the movie goes to 79 minutes, you need 5 film cans in order to move the 35 millimeter film to the various theaters around the country. If it's 78 minutes, you can do it with 4 film cans. Therefore, you have reduced the transportation costs of the film by 20%. And so, he was just a master of how to make money on films. And so I developed, he didn't call it, I called it the 3 Bs, blood, breasts, and beasts. He didn't call it that, But I took his advice and incorporated it into what became the drive-in totals. Now, the one thing Roger was not good at first was martial arts. He didn't really understand it, because he loved all the exploitation genres, but he didn't understand martial arts. And he said to me one day, because he'd seen some big box office numbers on some martial arts films, and he said to me, "What would be your advice on martial arts?" And I said, "I think that the era of the Asian stars is over, because at that point, people don't remember this today, but Jackie Chan had tried to come to America twice.
That's right.
and failed. It was only the 3rd time, when he was actually getting too old to do those stunts, that he became a big star in America. And so I said, I don't think these Hong Kong stars are doing it anymore. I said, but if you could find a really good-looking American martial arts champion who can act, I think that's the way to go." And so within 2 months, he calls me and he says, "Well, I found the guy." And that was the beginning of the career of Don the Dragon Wilson.
Wow.
And I met Don the Dragon years later, had him on my show, and Don said, "Yeah, I got this call from Roger Corman." He says, "I wasn't planning to be in the movies, And I think Don the Dragon made, I don't know, he probably made 30 movies.
Yeah.
I mean, they were turning those things out like crazy, like in the I would say from about the mid 80s to the mid 90s.
Yeah.
And Don kept himself in really good shape, and he became, I think I would consider him I don't know, a second-level martial arts start.
Sure.
You know, if
Sure.
you make the list of all the people who sort of made it in martial arts,
Right.
Don is one of them. And so that was a case of Roger kind of coming late to the party, but figuring out a way to do it. And, you know, Circle of Fire, Ring of Fire. You know, what were those titles? I don't know what they are. There's like two martial
Something
arts
of
plots.
fire.
There's only two martial arts plots, you know, and you alternate them, you know. There's the Rocky plot, you know. and then there's the revenge, you know, somebody killed your brother plot, you know. And that's all you can do with martial arts, you know.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because all the screen time is taken up with the actual martial arts scenes,
Yeah.
so those plots have to be basic Greek tragedies, you know, plots, you know.
Well, I've seen Roger Corman interviewed before, and your cadence and the way you're speaking is exactly the way he talks.
He's a very elegant
Yeah,
man,
which
and
he doesn't always
and he
seem
lo-
to jive with.
he would
you know.
always hire the top student at the USC Film School or the NYU Film School. Yeah, I mean, today there's like 30 great film schools in America, but at the time there were only, you know, basically those were the two places where all the great filmmakers came from. And he would hire them and give them their first film. And he would say, you know, as long as you have these elements, basically the drive-in totals in the movie, as long as these elements are in the movie, you can do anything else with the movie you want to do. And so, of course, you know, a lot of directors made their first, except in the case of Ron Howard. I mean, he told Ron, you have to act in 2 movies for me, which were Eat My Dust and Grand Theft Auto.
Oh,
I think.
yeah.
I think you have to act in 2 movies, and then I'll let you direct.
And he also directed
third
Grand Theft Auto.
Was that his first directing
I
movie?
think it was,
But he
but he
did he
also
also
was-
act in it?
yes.
I think he made him act in it
Yes,
because
he
he
did.
wanted to be a director. He didn't want to act anymore.
Right.
So in that case, you know, rather than taking the film student, he took an actor. You know, he took an actor whose name he thought he could use in movies, and he said, "You got to make 2 movies for me, Ron, and then I'll let you direct." But in most cases, he would just hire a really good director. I mean, he would look at student films, and you know, they would be doing art films.
Yeah.
You know, but he would say, you know, come make an exploitation film for me.
Sure. Sure. You were talking about the drive-in totals, and when I go to the movies and I see it's rated R, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to get. But when you start going over the drive-in totals, and you give me terms like aardvarking, or any action word that ends with the suffix "foo," I know exactly what I'm getting. And I've heard that you very carefully go through the movie. You dig deep into the movie. And
Well, I
you
hope you're not
actually-
implying that I would falsify the drive-in total.
But you actually go through and very carefully count these things up. Now,
I
is
do. And it's not easy. It's not always easy.
You went into stand-up comedy after the newspaper gig. Is that the way it worked, or was that going on at the same time that you were?
You know, there was this stand-up comedy boom in the '80s when every town had a comedy club, and so even though my normal show that I do is more of a storytelling show, I mean,
Right.
I'm doing a show now. I have a one-man show now that tours, but it's more of a long story type show. So I would occasionally do the comedy. I would mostly do universities, but I would occasionally do the comedy clubs, and I hated the comedy clubs, to tell you the truth, because you know, you get people on a Friday night who are drunk, and
Yeah.
the only way you can get off stage is to say fuck every 5 minutes,
Yeah.
every 5 seconds, and I had no shame. I would say fuck every 5 seconds, because there's Japanese tourists here. They don't even understand English. You know, it's all they understand is when you say fuck and they laugh. You know, and so I was in that world just for a
Yeah.
little while. But I preferred to do. I would actually I came to San Francisco quite a few times and did shows at a place called Wolfgang's that burned down. It doesn't. It's not there anymore. But the only two kinds of acts that they would book there are punk bands and me. On the night that the punk band wasn't playing, I was doing a show there. And then later, when the audiences got a little larger, I did the Great American Music Hall. And the great thing about the Great American Music Hall is it's right next door. It was right next door to the Mitchell Brothers Theater, the O'Farrell Theater. And and the Mitchell Brothers would always come. One of them, I get them mixed up, but I think it was Artie. Artie would come over, and he would say, "Why don't you ever review our movies, Joe Bob?" And I said, "Artie, I don't review X-rated movies." He said, "Well, you could make an exception for us because we're pioneers." And he had this whole spiel and everything. But they would always, anytime I would work at the Great American Music Hall, I would go to the dressing room, and there would be this big bag of VHS porn tapes that were sent over by the Mitchell Brothers.
Well, you transitioned into the Joe Bob's Drive-In Theater then on the movie channel, and that actually started in 1986 and went to about, I think, 1996, right? So you were there about 10 years.
Well, yeah, what happened is I wrote an article I went down to Austin where they were shooting the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. I was commissioned by Rolling Stone magazine to go there and interview Dennis Hopper because Dennis Hopper was coming out of rehab. He had just vanished for years. No one had seen him. And his first movie out of rehab was Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. And his agent and manager were telling him, "Please don't make your first movie Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2." And he was saying, "Well, I want to go to Austin because I'm friends with Willie Nelson and I would like to play golf with Willie, and it's, they're having the 4th of July picnic and I want to go to that." And, I mean, he was just being Dennis Hopper. I want to go to Texas for the summer, and so I want to do this movie. And so I went down there and I wrote this article about Dennis Hopper for Rolling Stone. And so the people at the movie channel, which is I don't know if did anybody here ever have the movie channel? Oh, really?
Yeah, a lot of
Wow, okay. Because it was the 4th premium service in the 80s. If you already had HBO, and you already had Showtime, and you had to pay $10 for HBO, and you had to pay $10 for Showtime, and then by the time you get your third premium service, that's Cinemax, so you're already $30 a month into your bill. And then if you still don't have enough premium services and you have to have one more, you would buy the movie channel. So it was the sister service of Showtime that never got any respect. And so they needed to load it up with cheap content. And so they went over to Europe, one of the film markets, and they bought all this crap. Because when you go to a film market, or when you went to a film market in those days, you want a certain movie, and they say, "Well, we'll sell you that as long as you buy these other 40 movies that go with it." And so they end up with all these, I don't know, these are vanished genres. They don't exist anymore, but the West German sex comedy, for example, we had several of those, So they bought these movies, and they wanted to program them, and they needed a host. So they had guest hosts come in on a Friday night. And so they said, "Oh, this guy wrote an article. He apparently likes these movies. He wrote this article for Rolling Stone." So they invite me to come and host 4 movies for 1 month of this late night show on Friday night, late night on the movie channel. So I went and I shot the show 4 weeks, and all it was the Lazy Boy recliner with the steer horns on the back. It was a little crummy insert stage overlooking the railroad yards at Penn Station. And they said, "Well, that worked okay." Invited me back the next month. So I did 4 more, invited me back the next month, invited me back the next month. Well, I stayed there 11 years. And I don't think we ever even had contract. Maybe in the 4th or 5th year we kind of did a contract, but we never signed it or anything. And so as the years went on, we would just add one thing to the set every month, and after about after about 4 years, we were shooting at the old Dumont Network studios in Spanish Harlem. The Dumont Network was this network in the 50s, where actually I walked behind the set one day and I saw that they paint over the flats every time a new show comes on. They paint over the flats. I would look on there; it had the Honeymooners on the. It was like an old flat from the Honeymooners. So anyway, we're shooting in Spanish Harlem, and all the other hosts are leaving or getting fired or whatever. And so finally, we're in this big sound stage, and my set's just at the little corner of the sound stage. And I said, guys, you're wasting a lot of money. Let me just do this in Dallas. I can do it at the public station in Dallas, in some small stage. And so they said, okay, that's a good idea. And so I just became the producer of the show and moved it to Dallas. And we shot at various places. And then Ross Perot ran for president. And in order to run for president, he built a TV studio. And he built like the nicest TV studio ever built. I mean, it was so great. It even looked good on the outside, and nobody wanted to use it. And so all it was used for is Ross Perot's presidential campaign. And so we kept giving him an offer, and until finally, they had to get somebody in there to be in there. And so that's where we ended up shooting drive-in theater for years.
Yeah.
And Ross Perot's stage, and it was just us, and occasionally Barney the dinosaur would come in, but mostly it was just us. And then when they changed format at the movie channel, there was a little 2-month hiatus, and I got a call from TNT, and they said, "You want to do a show over here?" And I said, "Sure. What kind of show?" "Well, it's kind of the same show." And I said, "Okay, well, I haven't gotten rid of the sets yet, so yeah, let's do the same show on the same set. Can we do that?" And they said, "Yeah, we like that idea." And so it's actually the exact same sets from the movie channel we started using for TNT. TNT had a little bit higher standards as far as production values,
What about movie selection?
They actually had better movies, but they were edited movies, But they had a great library. They had Ted Turner had bought the MGM library in 1982, and so they had Todd Browning's movies. They had all this great stuff from the 50s, the 40s, and they would never let me show it, and because they hated black and white. They said, people will not watch black and white, and so every year they would send me the list of movies. I would pick all the ones that I wanted to show, and they would never let me show any of them. Finally, they let me show It, the Terror from Beyond Space. And they let me show that because, they let me show Night of the Lepus every Easter. That was our Easter movie. But It, the Terror from Beyond Space, I had this thesis that all of Alien was a direct ripoff of It, the Terror from Beyond Space. And in order to prove it, we showed It, the Terror from Beyond Space, and then showed Alien to show, scene by scene, plot point by plot point. Alien is a direct steal from It, the Terror from Beyond Space. All right, is Alien a better movie? Yes, but they shouldn't they at least say that? Shouldn't that be somewhere in the credit roll at the end of Alien? We stole this from It, the Terror from Beyond Space. Yes, it should. Actually, I think they may have stolen Alien from It, the Terror from Beyond Space and Queen of Blood. Have you ever seen Queen of Blood? I think Queen of Blood, actually has some plot points that they use in Alien. So anyway, that was. So they would let me use black and white if it was, some special reason like that.
Right.
But usually, no. we're not going to show that old shit.
In between, in between those two different shows, you acted in a movie for Martin Scorsese called Casino.
Oh,
Wasn't
yeah.
that in between?
Yeah.
And you played the feckless Don Ward. People don't use
that
the
whole
word
movie relies
feckless.
on me. That whole movie, the whole plot of that movie, it just would fall apart if I wasn't there.
That is one of the most critical scenes in the movie. Really, it is.
You know, I have an interesting story about that. The actor that, you know, Martin Scorsese had all of his, you know, his regulars there. You know, De Niro and Pesci and of course James Woods was in the movie, and so you know who they wanted to meet? They wanted to meet my uncle in the movie, L.Q. Jones. They were waiting for that, you know, De Niro and Scorsese and everything. When is L.Q. Jones coming? When is L.Q. Jones going to show up on this? Because they were big fans of all these westerns that L.Q. Jones had been in, like, you know, The Wild Bunch and other.
Right.
And so he was like a superstar when he showed up.
Wow.
When he showed up on the set, because he was such a legend, you know. But between the movie channel and TNT, I was going out on auditions. So,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, was it intimidating to be dressed down by Robert De Niro? Because that is a major league.
Well, it
dressing
was
down.
at first when I first met him, because he doesn't talk a lot. You know, he doesn't. He's not a big conversationalist, and so when you're shooting a movie like that, because they have security around De Niro, and you're waiting on the lighting or whatever, then they also have security around you because you're in the scene with him. So you're basically on this little island, you know, where, you know, there's nobody there except you and him sitting on stools waiting for the lighting to be done. So you have to make conversation, you know.
Yeah.
And so I would try to make conversation, and he, you know, he got a lot of one-word answers.
Sure.
And so, so I think, like, in the middle of the second day, I said something like, you know, we were in the Riviera Casino in Las Vegas, and the second day I said something like, you know, these girls they have playing cocktail waitresses, they're a lot better looking today than they were yesterday. And De Niro goes, did you notice that too? And I thought, oh man, have I found our topic? We are cool now, you know? And so then from then on, we were great. We were fine. You know?
I want to give people in the audience a chance to ask questions in just a minute, but I do want to ask you about the Shudder, about the last drive-in, and the initial marathon. Yes, and just renewed for a second season. But the initial marathon, the Shudder servers actually crashed because so many people were trying to access the show. Did that, I mean, that's like a two-edged sword, because you're thrilled that you're getting that kind of attention, but people aren't able to watch, you know, they're not able to watch the show. So were you surprised by that kind of reaction?
Well, yeah, I was surprised, but obviously, I mean, because nobody was, let me put it this way, nobody was clamoring for my return to TV, okay?
Well, nobody that you heard, but we were.
Because from the time, you know, TNT had changed format, you know, they become We Know Drama. Remember that? We Know Drama. They became the We Know Drama Network. And so when they changed format, you know, they cut me loose. And then every year, somebody would come to me, you know, a TV guy, TV executive, or a producer, and say, hey, you want to do a new show? And I would always say, sure. And then I would never hear from him again. And so, so when they came to me in 2017 and said, you know, hey, you want to do a new show? You know, I said, yeah, let's go to lunch, because I always get a lunch out of it, you know. And so the two producers of the show met the producer and the director met Mangiarides and Austin Jennings We went to lunch at this pretty cheap place. It was pretty cheap lunch on 14th Street in New York. And they said, hey, you want to do a show? Yeah, what kind of show you want to do? Monster Vision. And I was like, I mean, it's 20 years, it's 17 years since we've done Monster Vision. Well, we want to do Monster Vision. And I'm like, I don't think you can repeat old formats on TV. It's like TV is all about the new, and they're like, no, we want to do Monster Vision. Yeah, well, we want to add anything to it? Nope, just want to do Monster Vision. Just exactly the way it was, And I'm like, well, okay, glad to have met you guys. Bye. And so then a few weeks later, a Shudder executive shows up, and he wants to have lunch. And so I had lunch with the Shudder executive, and he was a fan. And I realized what was happening. What was happening is that people who had watched me in my in their childhood were now TV executives. And so I was a bigger deal to them than the people in my own generation. It's like I was old news to guys my age, But the guys who had watched me when they were kids, who now ran things, they were like, yeah, come on. It's like, and it's true. It's like everybody I work with is under the age of 40, certainly, and a lot of them are under the age of 30. I mean, the director of the show, The Last Drive-In, his name Austin Jennings, he's 32 years old. He's a millennial. And he says things to me like, Joe Bob, we're going to do this next one on the Iconic set. And I said, what is the Iconic set? The one that's outside. And I said, why is that in the Iconic? And he says, everyone knows why that's iconic, Joe. I don't know why it's iconic. Said, no, it's iconic, or he'll say, we're going to do this just like that show you did in 1994 where you had the guy on and you were cooking the thing. And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. He said, we did 120 movies a year. I don't remember, what we did in 1994. And he says, oh, that was one of your best ones. You should go watch it. You should go watch that show. And so, thank God for Austin, because he says things to me like, we're going to end the marathon with Pieces. That's going to be our closer, Pieces. And I'm saying, Austin, are you fucking out of your mind? It's one of the worst movies ever made. And he says, no, people love it. It's a cult film. I love it. I have to watch it like twice a year. And I said, you're insane, Austin. He said, go rewatch it. Because I hadn't watched it since the 80s, So I go rewatch it. And I say, still sucks, Austin. Still totally sucks. And he's like, no, but you've got to trust me. Everyone is going to love this. And so we closed the marathon with Pieces. He was absolutely right. I mean, people went like ape for Pieces. Now, why do they like it? I don't know. I'll never know. It's a millennial thing. I'll never understand it, But I know that they like it. He was right about that one. He was right about Chud. We started the last drive-in series with Chud. Same conversation. Austin, Chud is really, really bad. And he was like, oh no, there's so many Chud lovers. And I said, why would they love Chud when I don't even think there's any Chuds in the movie? Everyone knows that it stands for cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers, right. But you never see any cannibalistic. You see some giant yellow eyes or something. It's like there's no Chuds in Chud, And he says, I know it. It's just got such a following. It's just like, And so I said, well, what is it? And he says, remember that box? I said, what box? He says, the video box for Chud. One of the best video boxes ever. And I said, no, I don't remember the video box for Chud. How would I remember the video box for Chud? And he says, it was just one of the greatest video boxes ever. And I said, okay, so you love the video box. I said, did you take the video box home, take the movie out of the video box, and watch the movie? He said, no, I just love the box, And so I said, so people love Chud because they love the box? This can't be, And he says, yeah. And so anyway, so we led off the whole series with Chud. Sure enough, oh, I'm loving this so much, immediately on the social media. Oh, I'm loving this so much. They're doing Chud, they're doing Chud, they're doing Chud. It's like, oh my God, people have gone nuts. People don't, and so it's good to have Austin directing the show because he tells me what's cool about the 80s, and everyone knows, everyone is, I thought the nostalgia thing for the 80s would play out in, say, 5 years. It's still going strong. It is still going strong. People still love the 80s.
And we love you. So,
thank you.
We're running a little low on time, and I'd like to get some questions before we let Joe Bob go. So, over here, you have a question for Joe Bob.
In the same vein, what was the thinking behind Phantasm for the whole Christmas special?
Well, that's one that we kind of. Oh, thank you. There's no. I'm not sure I would do that again. It was rough for me to watch all those Phantasm right in a row. I think the fact that we had all those Phantasms, we didn't have Phantasm 2, but we had the other ones. The fact that the tall man had recently died, that Don Coscarelli had retired, that we thought maybe it was our last chance to feature Reggie Bannister. There were just a lot of reasons that we thought, people are expecting us to show Silent Night, Deadly Night. Let's do something a little different. And so, but when he said, let's show all the Phantasms, even I was just like, I like Phantasm like once a year, but 4 in a row, I don't know if I can do that, And I'm glad we did it. I'm one of the only defenders of Phantasm 5, Ravager, the Ravager Phantasm. Everything except the ending. I don't understand the ending, but everything else, I like. And I think Phantasm, even Phantasm 4, is vastly underrated. So anyway, we were trying to sort of do something special.
Nice.
Any other questions? Yes.
Is there an out-of-print movie that you would like to see brought back to show?
Yeah, we can't find out who owns Howling 7. I want to show. I want to show Howling 7. We showed it on Monster Vision, and the people of Pioneer Town, California, wrote in that it uses the entire population of Pioneer Town, California, to make Howling 7, and so we had like the beginning of what I thought would be a cult film, and I actually went to New Line at the time and said, you should release this on DVD and do a lot of DVD extras, and it'll become a cult film. And they were like, "Are you fucking kidding us? We only made 50 cents on this movie. We didn't even finish doing the final 35 millimeter assembly. It's in pieces. It's in boxes. This is true. He said, it's in some back room here. It's in boxes. We told the guy, just stop. Just don't even finish the edit on the movie. And so the only form it exists in is a VHS. They had like just enough of it assembled, on tape that they could release a VHS, and so it's still to this day there is no 35 millimeter copy. There's only a VHS. There's no DVD, and so in the process of New Line being sort of becoming part of Warner Brothers, and some of its libraries there and some of it's not there. We don't know where it is. We can't find it. And the director, the Australian biker who directed it, went back to Australia and was never seen again. So we don't know how to get in touch with him either. And that guy, I don't know, has anybody seen Howling 7? Did anybody watch it on Monster Vision? Okay, because the guy the bar in Pioneer Town, the owner of the bar, he died too, and so there's nobody left to ask.
Yes, in the back.
What movies epitomize 3 Bs for you?
What was the question?
What movies epitomize the 3 Bs for
Oh,
you?
what movie has all of the 3 Bs? Oh,
It's okay.
oh, best blood movie, best breast movie, and best beast movie? Oh boy,
Well, that's a little PC question there.
that's a really tough one. You know, one of my top 10 movies is, and it's one reason that I'm happy to be here today, because Doug Bradley and Ashley Lawrence are here, is Hellraiser, and it pretty much has everything that you could want in a drive-in movie or an exploitation movie. You know, they used to have these movies in the 80s called I don't know what the exploitation name for them was, but they were sex farces, because the plot would always be the same. 4 guys on vacation are trying to get laid. 4 guys are on a road trip trying to get laid, and they don't get laid. They never get laid. But there are multiple girls in bikinis, and multiple girls topless, and multiple girls at the pool, and multiple girls everywhere. And there's always a hooker, and there's always a virgin, and and at the end the good guy and the good girl kiss. You know, that's it. But it was just a lot of nudity and stupid gags, a whole lot of stupid gags. Well, there was one called Gas Pump Girls that set the all-time record for a breast count. It was something like 136 or something like that. And I was they just don't make them like that anymore. I asked Jim Wynorski. You know, Jim Wynorski made a lot of exploitation movies in the 80s and 90s, and I saw him at a convention, and I said, Jim, high school sex comedy, sex farce, guys on vacation, guys on spring break, that kind of movie. Where did it go? And he says, never make one of those. You want to lose all your money? Never make one. And I said, why? What happened? And he says, the last one was American Pie. He says, there's nothing after American Pie. And I said, why though? Why? It's like, did 14-year-olds stop liking sex? Because that's what it was. It was addressed to the mind of the 13, 14, 15-year-old horny boy, right? And so I said, did they stop liking sex? And he says, no, I think they just like have all the porn that they can possibly do. And they're not going to watch a topless girl at the pool. They're not going to get anything out of the topless girl at the pool. I said, okay, so dead genre. But that would have been a breast champion back in the 80s.
We're going to have to wrap it up here, but I'd just like to say, Joe Bob, that we are so glad that you are back on the air and doing what you do better than anybody.
Thank you, man.